1979, Queens, New York. Somewhere in the borough, a man in his late 20s got dressed, stepped out his front door, and climbed into a car with two men he knew, two men he trusted. He was told he was going to a ceremony. The moment he had spent his entire adult life chasing, he was finally going to be made a full member of La Cosa Nostra, untouchable, official, inside. He never made it to the ceremony. He never made it anywhere at all. He walked into a room somewhere in Queens, and the room was not what they promised. There was no ceremony, no boss, no oath. There was just the end. Tommy DeSimone was 28 years old. His body was never recovered. The mafia does not leave receipts. This was not just another gangster disappearing into the concrete of New York City. Tommy DeSimone was 1/3 of the crew that committed one of the most infamous murders in American organized crime history. 9 years before that car ride, he was one of 3 men who beat a made man to death in a bar in Queens. A Gambino family soldier named William Davino, known to everyone as Billy Bats. Tommy DeSimone, Jimmy Burke, and Henry Hill. 3 men, 1 murder. 9 years later, only Tommy paid with his life. Jimmy Burke died in a prison hospital. Henry Hill died of heart disease at 69 years old, famous, protected, and free. So here is the question that should be burning in your mind right now. Why did the mafia execute Tommy DeSimone and let the other 2 walk? They were all there. They all had blood on their hands. Why did only 1 man pay? Here is what most people never understand about the way the mafia actually operates. They do not kill for revenge. They kill for survival. And by January of 1979, keeping Tommy DeSimone alive had become the single most dangerous decision the Lucchese crime family could make. This is the story of how one man's violence, his arrogance, and his complete inability to control himself turned him into an irredeemable liability. And why Jimmy Burke and Henry Hill understood the game in ways Tommy never did. And why understanding that difference is the difference between dying in a chair at 64 and vanishing at 28 with nobody asking too many questions. You have to understand who Tommy DeSimone really was. Not the character Joe Pesci played in Goodfellas, the actual man. Because Joe Pesci won an Academy Award playing him. He brought something real and terrifying to that screen. But there are things the movie could not fully capture. Tommy DeSimone was born on May 24th, 1950, in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He did not stumble into organized crime. He was born into it. His grandfather had run with organized crime figures in Los Angeles. His uncle had ties to the Gambino crime family. Crime was not a lifestyle choice for Tommy. It was inheritance. It was the air he breathed from the moment he could breathe. By his early teenage years, the family had relocated to Brooklyn, and Tommy was already running with criminals, already picking up the habits of the street, already showing the thing that would eventually get him killed. He was violent in a way that could not be explained by ambition or necessity. It was deeper than that. It was instinct. When Tommy was around 15 years old, he was introduced to Paul Vario, a powerful capo in the Lucchese crime family. Vario ran a crew out of Queens and Brooklyn that controlled truck hijackings, loan sharking, gambling operations, and every other racket you could name. Tommy became a Vario associate. So did a young man a few years older named Henry Hill. They worked together. They stole together. They built their reputations together. And eventually, they killed together. But here is what separated Tommy from every other associate in that crew. Henry Hill later said, the portrayal of Tommy in the film was 90 to 99% accurate. He said Pesci captured the energy perfectly. But Hill also pointed out one detail the movie got wrong for obvious casting reasons. Joe Pesci stands 5 feet 3 inches. Tommy DeSimone was over 6 feet tall and built like someone had poured violence into a human frame. He was physically enormous, and he used that size to terrorize people the way some men use charm or wit. He did not need a reason to be dangerous. He was dangerous by default. His first known murder happened in 1968. Tommy was 17 years old. According to Hill's own testimony, Tommy shot and killed a man named Howard Goldstein. No grievance on record. No prior conflict that explains it. No business reason, no territorial dispute, no mob logic. Just a young man with access to a weapon and no internal mechanism telling him to stop. That was the core of who Tommy was. He did not need a motive. He needed an opportunity. And he found opportunities everywhere. By 1970, Tommy was a full-time earner for the Vario crew. He was working the cargo operations at John F. Kennedy Airport, hijacking trucks loaded with merchandise, fencing stolen goods, generating revenue for Paul Vario and the Lucchese family. He was making money. He was building a reputation. He should have been on a trajectory toward the thing he wanted most. But Tommy had a problem he could never solve. He could not stop killing. And he was killing the wrong people. June 11th, 1970. The Sweet Lounge in Queens, a neighborhood bar, the kind of place where you went to drink, play cards, and do business without anybody paying too close attention. That night, a man named William Davino walked through the door. He was 49 years old. Everyone called him Billy Bats. He was a made man in the Gambino crime family, just released after serving 6 years on a narcotics charge. This was his welcome home party. Friends, family, associates, a room full of people happy to see him breathing free air again. Billy Bats knew Tommy DeSimone. Years earlier, when Tommy was just a kid working corners and running errands, he had shined shoes as part of his hustle. Bats remembered, and that night, with a room full of witnesses, Bats decided to remind him. He told Tommy to go home and get his shine box. Take a second to understand what that meant in context. Billy Bats was a made man. Tommy was an associate. In the hierarchy of La Cosa Nostra, a made man could say what he wanted to an associate. An associate could not respond. The insult was protected by rank. Bats was not being reckless. He was exercising a privilege that the rules of the organization granted him. He had every right. And Tommy had no right to do anything about it. Except Tommy did not care about rights. Tommy did not operate within the logic of institutional hierarchy. He operated within the logic of his own ego. Henry Hill saw what was building in Tommy's eyes. He pulled him outside before it escalated. He talked him down, or tried to. They waited. The bar started clearing out around 2:30 in the morning. Then they went back inside. What happened next would echo for the next 9 years and eventually cost Tommy his life. Tommy walked up to Billy Bats and beat him with a pistol until the man could not defend himself. Jimmy Burke, who was there that night, joined in. They kicked him. They stomped him. Bats was cracking under the blows. Blood on the floor. A made man lying unconscious at their feet. Henry Hill helped them load the body into the trunk of a car. Bats was not dead yet. They drove north, toward the Connecticut border, to a location in upstate New York. When they opened the trunk, Billy Bats was still breathing. Tommy stabbed him. Jimmy Burke shot him 4 times in the chest. Then they buried him in the dirt. 6 months later, concerned the body might surface, they dug him up and buried him again in a different location. They thought they had buried the problem along with the man. They had not. Here is what that murder actually meant in the world of organized crime. You do not kill a made man without permission from the highest levels of leadership. That is not a suggestion. That is the foundational rule that holds the entire structure together. If a made man can be killed by any associate with a grudge and a gun, the whole system collapses. The oath becomes meaningless. The ranks become meaningless. Everything falls apart. That rule exists to protect everyone in the organization. Tommy, Jimmy, and Henry had not just killed a man. They had killed a Gambino family soldier. They were Lucchese associates. The Gambino family was owed blood, and they were going to collect it eventually. The only question was timing. But here is the thing that should astonish you. What happened next? Because if Tommy DeSimone had learned anything from the Billy Bats murder, the lesson should have been this: lay low, stay quiet. Stop drawing attention. He was already walking a razor wire. One step wrong, and he was done. Tommy did not learn that lesson. He did not learn any lesson. Later, in 1970, just months after the Bat's murder, Tommy was sitting in a bar, drinking, playing cards with the crew. A young associate named Michael Gianco worked there. Everyone called him Spider. He was nobody important. He ran errands. He fetched drinks. He was not a threat to anyone. Tommy, drunk and bored, shot Spider in the foot. No argument, no build-up. He just shot him because the moment presented itself, and Tommy never found a reason not to do something violent when violence was available. Spider recovered. He came back to work. A few weeks later, Tommy was back in the same bar. Spider made a remark, the kind of remark that passes between men in any room without consequence. Tommy pulled his gun and shot Spider 3 times in the chest. Spider died on the floor of that bar. Henry Hill later said watching that was the moment he truly understood what Tommy was. Not a gangster, not a killer who operated within the logic of the mob. A psychopath. And not because the murder was so extreme, because it was so unnecessary. Spider was not a threat. He was not a rival. He was not even an inconvenience. Tommy killed him because he was bored, and because there was a moment where he could, and in Tommy's world that was always enough. Then in 1974, Tommy killed again. A man named Ronald Jerome, connected to the Gambino organization, known by the street name Foxy. The details on exactly what triggered it are murky even by mob standards. What is documented is the result. Another body. Another Gambino connection. Another entry on a ledger that was already dangerously overbalanced against Tommy DeSimone. By the mid-1970s, Tommy had built something most men in that world never build. Not respect, not power. A kill count that crossed family lines and made him a walking diplomatic crisis. He was an earner. He was a killer. He was connected to Paul Vario, one of the most powerful figures in the Lucchese family. But he was also a man the Gambino family had not forgotten. They had 2 of their people dead because of him. They were patient. Organized crime has always been better at patience than people expect. They were waiting for the right moment to collect. And then came December 11th, 1978, the day that changed everything. At 6 in the morning, 6 armed men walked into the Lufthansa cargo building at John F. Kennedy International Airport, 202 Norwood Avenue, and executed the largest cash robbery in American history up to that point. They stole $5,875,000 in cash, an additional $875,000 in jewelry, nearly $6,800,000 total. Adjusted for inflation, that is approximately $30 million today. The mastermind was Jimmy Burke. The crew included several Lucchese associates. Tommy DeSimone was one of them. The planning was extraordinary. Jimmy Burke had spent months developing an inside source at the cargo facility. He knew the schedules, the guard rotations, the locations of the cash shipments. The execution was precise. In under an hour, 6 men had carried out what law enforcement would spend the next decade trying to fully reconstruct. Each man was supposed to receive approximately $750,000. Most of them never saw it, because Jimmy Burke started killing the crew. One by one, the Lufthansa participants disappeared. Louis Cafora and his wife Joanna, murdered in March of 1979. Parnell Edwards, strangled. Paolo Licastri, shot. Richard Eaton, strangled and left in a freezer. Teresa Ferrara, dismembered. Martin Krugman, missing and presumed dead. By the summer of 1979, 7 people connected to the Lufthansa heist were dead, and Jimmy Burke was keeping the money. But Jimmy did not kill Tommy. He did not need to. Someone else was already handling it. January 14th, 1979. The day Tommy's wife, Angela, reported him missing. She told police she had not seen him in weeks. The last time they spoke, he borrowed $60 from her. He said he had somewhere important to be. He never came back. Here is what actually happened, pieced together from multiple law enforcement sources, FBI records, and Henry Hill's own extensive testimony. The Lucchese family told Tommy he was being made. Full initiation, the ceremony, the oath, the rank. Everything Tommy had wanted since he was a teenager running errands for Paul Vario. He had waited 9 years for this. He believed it. He got in a car with 2 men he trusted, men who were part of his world, and they told him they were taking him to the ceremony location. They drove him to a house in Queens. Tommy walked through the door. He looked around the room. And according to accounts from people close to the situation, including statements Hill made over the years after becoming a government witness, Tommy understood immediately that something was wrong. The room was empty of the people who should have been there. There was no ceremony. There was no oath. What happened in that room is still partially disputed in the accounts. Some sources place John Gotti, then a rising figure in the Gambino family, as present. Some accounts name Tommy Agro, a Gambino enforcer, as the man who pulled the trigger. What is consistent across the accounts is the outcome. Tommy de Simone was shot in the head. He died in that room. His body was taken somewhere and disposed of so thoroughly that law enforcement has never recovered it. To this day, no remains, no grave, nothing. He is legally presumed dead, but in the literal sense, he simply ceased to exist. The Lucchese family approved the hit. They did not just allow it, they facilitated it. The fake ceremony was their contribution. They provided the bait, the location, the comfort that got Tommy into that room without resistance. Because the alternative was a war with the Gambino family they could not afford to fight, and a liability they could no longer protect. Now comes the question that the story demands. Why Tommy and not the others? Jimmy Burke, born July 5, 1931, in Queens, New York. Nicknamed Jimmy the Gent, because he was known for tipping everyone who worked with him, being generous with merchandise and money, having a style of operation that was professional and controlled. He was one of the most feared and respected criminal figures in New York for 3 decades. A Lucchese family associate under Paul Vario, a master of logistics, a man who planned the Lufthansa heist and executed it without a single shot fired on scene. He was brilliant by any measure you want to apply to what he did. But Jimmy Burke had a problem that worked in his favor in this particular situation. His father was Irish-American. His mother was Irish-American. In La Cosa Nostra, the rules of initiation required 100% Italian heritage. Both parents, Jimmy Burke, could never be made. He was permanently an associate, no matter how much money he made or how many years he gave to the organization. He existed in a category that the formal rules of the Mafia did not fully address when it came to the Billy Bat situation. The Gambino family's demand for justice was rooted in the violation of the made man rule. Tommy was an associate who murdered a made man. That violation carried a mandatory response within the structure of La Cosa Nostra. Jimmy had participated. But the original insult, the one that started the chain, was Tommy's response to being humiliated. Tommy was the one Billy Bats had insulted. Tommy was the one who could not absorb it. Tommy was the one who went back and started the beating. In the logic of the organization, Tommy owned the decision to do it. And there was something else working for Jimmy. After the Bats murder, Jimmy Burke did what Tommy could never do. He was quiet. He stepped back. He did not brag. He did not insert himself into situations where he could create new problems. He kept making money, kept building his reputation as a professional, and let the organization see him as a reliable earner rather than a walking crisis. Jimmy Burke was eventually arrested in connection with a point-shaving scheme at Boston College, convicted in 1980, and later convicted of the murder of Richard Eaton. He died at Wendy Correctional Facility in Alden, New York, on April 13, 1996. He was 64 years old, heart failure. He had been incarcerated since 1980. He spent the last 16 years of his life in a cell. But the Mafia never touched him. Not a bullet, not a rope. He died in a prison hospital, old, in bed. Henry Hill, born June 11, 1943, in Brooklyn, New York, half Irish, half Italian. Like Jimmy, he could not be made. His mixed heritage locked him permanently at associate level. He was connected to the Verio crew, involved in the airport hijackings, present at the Billy Bats murder, and implicated in a long list of crimes stretching from the 1960s through the late 1970s. But in the calculus of the Gambino family's grievance, Henry was the least culpable figure in the room the night Bats died. Tommy started it. Jimmy joined it. Henry helped dispose of the body. He was not the instigator. He was not even the main actor. He was the cleanup. And in the logic of mob accountability, that distinction was enough to keep him off the priority list. In 1980, Henry Hill was arrested on narcotics charges. He was facing serious federal time. He made the calculation that his loyalty to the organization was worth less than his freedom, and he became a government informant. He testified against Paul Verio, who received a 10-year sentence. He testified against Jimmy Burke. He provided information that led to approximately 50 convictions. He entered the Federal Witness Protection Program. He moved, changed his name, disappeared. The government protection made any attempt on his life a federal crime with automatic scrutiny. Beyond that, killing Henry after he had already testified accomplished nothing. He had already told them everything he knew. Murdering him would only bring more attention, more investigations, more pressure on an organization already under siege from multiple federal task forces. Henry Hill, alive and irrelevant, was better for the mob than Henry Hill dead and in every newspaper in America. He was eventually expelled from witness protection in 1987 after repeatedly breaking the rules, continuing to deal drugs, and blowing his own cover. He spent the next 25 years living more or less openly. He wrote books. He did television interviews. He sold mob-themed pasta sauce with his own face on the label. The mafia knew where he was. They always knew. They left him alone because he was not worth the trouble. Henry Hill died on June 12, 2012, one day after his 69th birthday, in a Los Angeles hospital. Heart disease, natural causes. The mafia never came for him. So pull back and look at the full picture. 3 men killed Billy Bats. 1 was executed. 2 died in their beds. Why? Because the mafia is not in the revenge business. It is in the survival business. And Tommy DeSimone had become incompatible with survival. He had murdered Billy Bats, a Gambino-made man, without permission. That alone was a death sentence waiting for a date. But Tommy kept adding to the ledger. Spider, dead for making a joke. Foxy Jerome, dead for reasons nobody could fully articulate. Every body was another reason. Every killing without sanction was another argument for why Tommy could not be trusted with the responsibility of membership or even continued existence within the organization's orbit. Paul Verio had protected Tommy for years. That protection was not unlimited. When the Gambino family formally demanded action over the Bats murder, Verio faced a choice. Go to war with one of the most powerful families in New York to protect one man who had been causing problems for nearly a decade, or give Tommy up and maintain the peace that made business possible. The answer was obvious. The fake ceremony was efficient, clean, no public confrontation, no shootout, no dramatic escalation. They simply told Tommy what he wanted to hear, put him in a car, and solved the problem in a room with no witnesses. There is a lesson in this story that goes beyond the specifics of these 3 men and the 9 years between Billy Bats dying and Tommy following him. The mafia operates on a logic that is colder and more precise than most people imagine when they think about organized crime. It is not about honor in the romantic sense. It is not about loyalty as a moral virtue. It is about the organization's ability to function. You protect assets. You eliminate liabilities. You maintain the relationships between families that allow business to continue. Tommy DeSimone was a liability at every level simultaneously. He generated income, yes, but he generated crises faster than he generated revenue. Jimmy Burke understood the equation. He was violent when violence served a purpose. He killed to protect himself, to eliminate witnesses, to maintain the silence that kept his operations running. His violence was instrumental. Tommy's violence was recreational. That is the difference between a man who dies in a prison hospital at 64 and a man who disappears at 28. Henry Hill understood something different, but equally important. He understood when to exit. When the walls close in on a man who has given everything to the organization will not save him. The organization will use him as long as he is useful and eliminate him when he becomes a problem. Henry chose a third option. He made himself into someone else's problem. He gave the government what it needed and walked away from a world that had already decided how his story was going to end. That is a different kind of intelligence than Jimmy's, but it worked just as effectively. Tommy never understood either version of the equation. He thought his reputation was armor. He thought the years of loyalty, the bodies, the hijackings, the money he had helped make for Paul Vario meant that he was protected. He thought the organization owed him something. The Mafia does not owe anyone anything. It is a business. When the cost of keeping you alive exceeds the value of having you alive, the calculation changes, and there is no appeal process. On January 14th, 1979, Tommy DeSimone walked into a room in Queens thinking he had finally arrived. 28 years old, connected, dangerous, certain of his own invincibility. The room told him the truth, the only way the Mafia knows how to tell it, directly, finally, without the possibility of misunderstanding. His body was never found. His story ended in a room somewhere in Queens with no marker and no ceremony. The thing he wanted more than anything, the ceremony that would have made him official, that ceremony was the instrument of his death. The Mafia has always had a dark genius for irony. What happened to the others? Paul Vario was eventually convicted of extortion and sentenced to 4 years in federal prison, a sentence delivered largely through Henry Hill's testimony. He died in prison in 1988. Jimmy Burke died at Wendy in 1996, having never told anyone anything about anything. John Gotti, the figure some sources place in that room in Queens on the night of Tommy's death, went on to become boss of the Gambino family, one of the most publicly known mob figures in American history, and died in a federal prison medical center in June of 2002. Henry Hill outlived almost everyone in his story. He spent his last years trading on the fame of a movie about his own life, and left behind a legacy that is equal parts cautionary tale and reluctant entertainment. The Lufthansa heist, the crime that brought the whole crew together for the last time, was never fully prosecuted the way the FBI hoped. Most of the money was never recovered. Most of the crew was dead before any of them could be made to answer for it in court. $6,800,000 vanished into the infrastructure of organized crime and private greed and was never seen again. Here is what the story of Tommy DeSimone reveals about the world he inhabited. The mob does not kill for rage. It kills for efficiency. Tommy was not executed because the Gambino family was angry, though they were. He was not executed because he had embarrassed the Lucchese family, though he had. He was executed because the Lucchese family calculated that the cost of the coming war was higher than the cost of his life. That is all it was. A ledger, a decision, a room in Queens. 3 men killed Billy Batts. One of them could not be controlled. One of them was too valuable. One of them was too small a target. Only the first one went into that car in January 1979. Only the first one never came back. The rules of the Mafia are simple. They are just not the rules most people think they are. It is not about honor. It is not about the code. It is about who serves the organization and who threatens it. Tommy DeSimone served it and threatened it simultaneously for 9 years. When the threat finally outweighed the service, the organization did what it always does. It closed the account. If you want to understand organized crime, understand this. The man who cannot control himself is the most dangerous man in any criminal organization. Not dangerous because of what he does to enemies. Dangerous because of what he forces his own people to do to him. Tommy thought his violence made him untouchable. It made him a target. And on January 14th, 1979, in a room nobody has ever officially identified, In a borough full of secrets, the Mafia proved one more time what it has always known. The rules always win, even when the rule is you. If this story got under your skin the way it should, hit subscribe. We drop a new mob documentary every single week, and drop a comment below. What Mafia figure should we investigate next? We read every single one.